I'm Rahil Philippos, and you are listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about the economic cost of climate change. We also give you a quick update on the Congress. But first, we talk about the Supreme Court's verdict on the Sena versus Sena tussle in Maharashtra. In June last year, Maharashtra's former urban development minister, Eknath Shinde, walked out of the Shiv Sena along with 40 of its 55 MLAs, allied with the BJP to form a new government in the state, and replaced Uddhav Thackeray as the new chief minister. This move also led to a vertical split in the party and the formation of two rival groups of Shiv Sena, one led by Eknath Shinde and the other led by Uddhav Thackeray. And what followed was a prolonged court battle where Thackeray challenged Eknath Shinde's decision. When we spoke to the Indian Express's Shubhangi Khapre, she talked to us about it.
See, on the first day, by the time Uddhav Thackeray learned about this defection in his party, he convened a meeting next day at the party meeting, political party meeting, and there he realized that 12 MLAs were missing. So, in the petition that was filed in the Supreme Court, they sought the disqualification of these 12 MLAs. But by second, third day, they realized FOMO had gone, and later on, the numbers became 40. But they sought the disqualification of 16 members, including Eknath Shinde, because they violated the whip of the political party.
Now, for those who may not know, a party whip ensures that members of a political party maintain discipline and unity. When an MLA disregards a party whip, it's considered a defiance against the party or the party line. And in this case, the MLAs didn't turn up for a meeting, and so Thackeray argued that they were disregarding the party whip and needed to be disqualified.
And when you invite a disqualification from the party, then you can no longer be the member of the state legislative party also. So they wanted to put them in that crisis and also basically to challenge the government formation or the government which was in existence, to raise the question mark on the whole morality and the legality of this newly formed Shinde government.
And this brings us to the latest Supreme Court decision regarding this matter. In the verdict, the apex court said that they cannot disqualify the 16 MLAs and that the Speaker of the House would have to decide on the disqualification petition.
Under the 10th schedule of the anti-defection law, the Supreme Court cannot disqualify any member. As per the rules, laws, constitutional provisions, the decision to disqualify or not disqualify an elected member is the jurisdiction of the Speaker. So in that sense, the Supreme Court has referred back the issue to Speaker, asking them to decide and determine the whole process again, basically. So that's an interesting aspect, which we'll have to wait and see, because the next session, which has been convened by Maharashtra Assembly, is in July. So from July, when the House is reconvened, the Speaker will have to play a very major role because he has to look into all these aspects.
But what's crucial to know is that the Speaker right now is Rahul Narvekar, who is a BJP leader and who was elected after the Shinde rebellion. So it's unlikely he's going to disqualify the MLAs now. Though the other thing that the Supreme Court called into question was the floor test that was called upon after the rebellion to see whether or not the Uddhav Thackeray government had the majority. Because this had happened under the newly elected Speaker Rahul Narvekar and based on the directive of Bhagat Singh Koshyari, the former governor of Maharashtra. But the court said that Koshyari did not have any power to decide that.
Because what the Supreme Court is arguing is that just because the opposition, the BJP, has approached them, petitioned them, the governor, to saying that you give directives to the chief minister to carry the floor test, and in accordance to that, the governor has acted, so which raises the moral questions. And that's where the Supreme Court felt that that was not the right thing to do for the governor. But then the whole problem, the counter argument, which the political parties are saying, that once the party was divided, the party was split, then the party automatically had reduced in numbers. But the whole question the Supreme Court asking is, that was still undecided. Who is the real party? That is still unclear. So in such scenario, the governor had no right to ask Uddhav Thackeray to take the floor test.
But what's important to note is that back then, Uddhav Thackeray had resigned before the floor test could actually take place. But this decision ultimately proved to be unfavorable because in their petition, Thackeray's faction had asked the Supreme Court to reinstate the MVA government with Uddhav as the chief minister. But the apex court concluded that since Thackeray did not face the floor test, they could not reinstate the government.
Had Uddhav Thackeray faced the vote of confidence on the floor of the House, had he taken the vote trust, and even if he were defeated, that would give him some legal validity to kind of reassert his claim to come back in power post judgment. But the point is, Uddhav Thackeray, without giving any reasons or without citing any reasons, he just resigned. He resigned voluntarily. So there was no coercion. See, had there been some kind of a reasoning, then the courts would have been able to kind of further look into that aspect or further argue on this aspect. But because the resignation was voluntarily done by Uddhav Thackeray himself, the whole question of whether the reinstatement of Uddhav Thackeray-led government, Uddhav Thackeray as the chief minister, is out of question.
Now, after the verdict came out, the former chief minister said that he may have made a mistake by resigning, but he also took a moral stand against people who betrayed him and his party.
ठीक है, कानूनी तौर पर मैंने इस्तीफा दिया, शायद गलत हो सकता है, लेकिन नैतिकता अगर देखें तो जिन लोगों को मेरे पिताजी ने, मेरे पार्टी ने सब कुछ दिया, वो लोग उठकर मेरे ऊपर उंगलियां उठाएं, तो उनके लिए मैं मेरा विश्वास या अविश्वास क्यों जताने की कोशिश करूं?
Now, in its verdict, the Supreme Court not only commented on the Speaker and the Governor, but it also scrutinized the role of the Election Commission of India. After the rebellion, when the Shiv Sena split into two factions, both of them staked a claim on the party name and its symbol, and the two groups asked the Election Commission for a solution. And the commission took a decision in the favor of the Eknath Shinde faction. Now, this had also been challenged by Thackeray in the Supreme Court, and the court came down heavily on the commission's decision.
When the matter was pending before the Supreme Court, the matter was within the purview of the state legislature. How could this Election Commission of India hand over the party's title and the symbol to Eknath Shinde's party? So that was a major decision that is debatable, and that is being debated even now. Now, Election Commission of India may have its own arguments, but the point is the perception that has come out in public is they have not acted fairly. And I think to that extent, the Supreme Court's verdict was very objective. And I think more than just looking at this as one of the cases, the larger message that the Supreme Court judgment, D.Y. Chandrachud has raised and has kind of conveyed a very, very loud and bold message that these institutions, which are the pillars of Indian democracy, probably have not done the duty that they be expected. See, whether it's president or governor or the speaker for that matter, they are political appointees. That's a fact. I mean, that's what's applicable to the BJP-led government, was applicable to the Congress-led governments also in the past, or any government. But the point is, once a person is appointed on a constitutional post, any constitutional post, like Election Commission of India, governor, or a speaker, the least one expects is that they will be non-partisan. I mean, that's a basic criteria that one expects from them, especially when you're heading any independent bodies. Now, in this whole process, I mean, even if you don't go into the technicalities and the legal nuances into all arguments, the point is, from Chief Justice of India's judgment, one thing we sum up is that he has wrapped all three institutions for its failure, whether it's Election Commission of India, whether it's governor, whether it's speaker, all three have to some extent, in some context, have failed in their duties. And that is the crux that emerges from judgment.
And Shubhangi says that despite such a strong statement about the role of the speaker, the governor, and the election commission, Shinde's Shiv Sena and the BJP are celebrating the verdict because in the end, it means that they can continue to be in power.
The government is saved, but he lost the face. Because this verdict is so strong, the strictures, if we minutely study in details, they are very harsh strictures, and it raises a lot of question marks. The entire process have been questioned, entire outcome of this processes of these independent authorities have been questioned. And I feel had this kind of verdict come, say, 20 years ago, when, the political ethics and the morality were so supreme and, people were more sensitive to these things, I think any chief minister would have immediately resigned. But the way things are in not only in politics, but every sector, every field, the way things have deteriorated or the things are being redefined, the whole concept of morality, democracy, everything is being, the way it's being perceived, the new narratives are emerging. I think the ruling party, that is BJP and Eknath Shinde Sena, they're celebrating because for them, what really mattered was whether the government will survive or not. And since it has survived, for whatever reasons, they are jubilant, they are very happy about it. But having said this, I think somewhere they also know at the back of their mind that the strictures passed by the Supreme Court of India are not something they can take it lying down. So the think tank within BJP, at least, I think they will surely take this whole thing into a political realm because elections are in 2024. May will be the Lok Sabha and again 6 months later assembly elections. So they will build up a new narratives and they will come out with stronger defense for themselves. But what cannot be ignored, cannot be lost sight of is the Supreme Court judgment is extremely important. And hereafter, every institution, every independent authorities, some way will have to, if there's any kind of that sensitivity left, they will have to explore, relook at this whole thing again.
And now coming to the MVA, Shubhangi says that even though the top court did not reinstate them back into power, the verdict definitely gives a moral boost to the coalition.
Because it gives them new issues to question the morality of Shinde government. And I think on this single factor, and indirectly BJP also, I mean, directly we can say, because the whole Operation Lotus was done by BJP. But both the sides also realize that the battle has not ended. Because see, the whole problem is the government states, and nobody can throw this government till 2024. They will complete its remaining tenure. But the point is, this marks the beginning of a new bitter battle when it comes to taking sides, building the narratives in public's mind. So the battle that was in court has now come to the legislature, and the speaker's role is going to be very important. So there's going to be a very, very prolonged battle ahead, both in legislature as well as political party levels. And MVA, if they manage to stay together, then BJP and Shinde has reasons to worry because for them, it means a lot of things, not only these issues they may overcome with building new narratives, but at the same time, there are larger issues of social engineering and how they kind of keep their vote banks intact and what new initiatives they take to kind of consolidate each month's vote banks. So yes, these are the larger challenges for the ruling Shinde and Fadnavis government ahead, especially with elections knocking the doors. And also the kind of ambitious targets Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Amit Shah has set for Maharashtra, because after Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra is the second largest state, which gives the maximum number of seats. Like if Uttar Pradesh gives 80 Lok Sabha seats, Maharashtra gives 48. That is second highest. And this is a state where everybody will be looking at. And for BJP to deliver the results is not going to be so easy.
And next we talk about climate change. Now, we have been witnessing the visible impacts of climate change, including rising temperatures, unexpected rainfall, and frequent occurrences of extreme weather events such as flash floods and cyclones. But what is important to consider is that unlike these events themselves, their economic cost is not immediately clear. Most of us may not know how much climate change is actually costing the economy, and also how much it can cost when we try to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. And so in this segment, my colleague Anvati Singh speaks to the Indian Express's Udit Mishra about how the Indian economy is affected by climate change and our efforts to mitigate it.
So, Udit, could you first tell us how the risks from climate change are usually categorized?
Okay. So, there are broadly two ways in which the impact or risks through climate change is looked at. One is to look at the physical risk, which we all understand easily, which is to say that temperatures going up, and these could be, this is a medical terminology, almost chronic risks and acute risks. So, temperatures going up in a sustained manner, that's a chronic risk. And then you have some extreme weather event, and that's an acute risk. So those are the two kinds of physical risk. And then the other kind of risks that come are the transition risks, which is to say when an economy or a country wants to go to a low carbon or a a state where there are fewer such events, it takes certain actions. And then what happens to that in that process? It could lead to, those actions themselves could lead to all kinds of other ramifications. It could lead to higher inflation because you're, maybe taxing certain things. People's purchasing power may go down. So it's a combination of the physical risks and the transition risks of what will happen to the economy.
Right. And today we're talking about this economic impact of climate change. But before we get into that, could you tell us about the general impact of climate change in India?
So when you look at the data for this, you find that the average annual temperature in the country has been rising. If you take, say, chunks of 20-year periods, then there has been a sharp increase over the last century or so. And similarly, we also find that in India, there's a fair amount of increase in the extreme weather phenomenons. And on the geography side, there are massive risks to India because we have a very varied geographical region, and it has all kinds of landscapes. So, in one of the maps, this report from RBI has shown how different aspects or different topographies in India are facing different types of climate risks. So in the coastal plains, there is a chance of or the risk of heavy precipitation and urban floods. Whereas in, say, the Great Himalayas, landslides and cloudbursts, many of the things that we've heard in news, they tend to happen more or they are more likely. Similarly, in the desert areas, heat waves can be seen, and that also holds for, say, the central peninsular plateau. So the geography is varied, and with each section of the geography, scientists have found that different kinds of climate events or unexpected or terrible events may happen. And this affects everything from, agricultural production to humans and their health. So that's been happening almost consistently now.
And based on the data that we have right now, how have these changes affected the Indian economy?
Yeah, so there are several predictions that have been made, several assessments that have been done on the impact of climate change on India's economy. For example, in 2019, Niti Aayog found that around 600 million Indians were facing severe water stress, with 8 million children below 14 years of age in urban India at risk because of poor water supply. Similarly, in 2020, World Bank said that of the 80 million job losses due to heat stress between 2020 and 2030 globally, 34 million could come from India. And then the IPCC working group in 2020 stated that India is one of the most vulnerable countries globally in terms of the population being affected by the rising sea level. By the middle of the current century, around 35 million people in India could face annual coastal flooding.
Right. And these numbers make it clear that Indians are and will continue to be affected by what climate change is doing to the planet. But the other thing that you write is that even India's efforts to mitigate climate change impacts the economy significantly, because imposing higher taxes on petrol or diesel, for example, leads to inflation and affects the poor disproportionately. And India is a country that is trying to lower its carbon emission and hoping to reach a net zero goal. So how are its plans in that direction expected to impact the overall economy?
So in the Western or developed countries, you hear a lot about degrowth. There's a lot of discussion about finding a balance between their level of per capita incomes or living and trying to balance it out with the climate reality. Whereas in countries like India, in many such developing countries, but especially in a country like India with massive population, trying to alleviate poverty, grow fast, this is a remarkably diametrically opposite direction. We need actually cheap sources of energy like coal to actually grow fast and raise the per capita income. And even though we have made a lot of effort to increase our renewable energy, the fact remains that, if you look at India's primary energy consumption, the share of fossil fuels is nearly close to 100. It's like 90% odd. And which means that, even when we say that we drive an electric car, an EV, the energy for that is coming from some fossil fuel. So you're burning coal to create that electricity, which then charges your car. So at one level, the pollution aspect or the global warming aspect, those things do not change because ultimately the source of energy is still fossil fuel based. So that's where the trouble is. And it is important to remember that if India wants to grow fast and become an advanced economy, these emissions will increase, because with it is only by doing that at one level that your productivity and production levels will go up remarkably. And I think the net zero demands are obviously pulling in a totally different direction, and the desire to become an advanced economy will pull India in a totally different direction. We are right now a lower middle income economy, and to become an advanced economy, we'll have to really increase our per capita income, and emission levels will perhaps go up along with it. It will not be a straightforward thing to balance these two diametrically opposite strands. And it will require a lot of policy nuancing and action to ensure that whatever we emit more in the process of growing fast is then somehow compensated and we reach the net zero goal.
Right, and speaking of policies, do we know what India is saying about how it will stick to its goal of zero carbon emission while advancing its economy at the same time?
So the first thing is to understand is that whether we take, say, the GDP growth or we take inflation, the two very straightforward ways in which one could look at the impact of climate change, we find that no matter what, GDP will take a bit of a hit. And in one of the charts, the RBI researchers have actually clarified that it is actually better to take a strict action towards achieving net zero by 2050 than to delay it. If we carry on with our current policies, then the hit on GDP would be close to 10% between now and 25 years hence. Whereas if we take action towards achieving net zero by 2050, we might be able to reduce this hit to something around less than 2.5% of GDP. So it might be tough, but we might be able to do it. But the flip side in this is that, any such action where we're trying to get to net zero by 2050 might in the short term raise prices. Inflation may spike quite dramatically. So that's the offside or the trade-off that we would have to sort of look at in terms of policies. And there is no one set of policies that can sort of be done today which will solve for the next 25 years because of the lack of clarity about what climate change will throw up possibly every year or every passing decade.
And in the end, we give you a quick update on the Congress President Mallikarjun Kharge. Last week, a district court in Punjab, Sangrur, issued a notice to the Congress President Mallikarjun Kharge in a rupees 100 crore suit filed against him for alleged defamatory remarks against the Bajrang Dal and comparing it to the outlawed Popular Front of India in his party's Karnataka election manifesto. Ahead of the Karnataka polls, which it eventually won, the Congress in its manifesto released on May 2nd said that law and constitution are sacrosanct and cannot be violated by individuals and organizations like Bajrang Dal, PFI, or others promoting enmity or hatred, whether among majority or minority communities. It also promised to take decisive action, including a ban on organizations spreading hatred amongst communities. And the BJP had hit out against Congress for equating Bajrang Bali with the Popular Front of India, which was banned by the central government last year. In fact, the Prime Minister during his rally said that the Congress wants to lock up Bajrang Bali, that is, Lord Hanuman.
लेकिन दुर्भाग्य देखिए, जब मैं आज हनुमान जी की पवित्र भूमि को प्रणाम करने के लिए आया हूं, उसी समय कांग्रेस पार्टी ने अपने मैनिफेस्टो में बजरंग बली को थाने में बंद करने का निर्णय किया है.
Now, after this, Hitesh Bharadwaj, the national president of Hindu Suraksha Parishad, accusing Kharge of making defamatory remarks against the Bajrang Dal, filed a petition in the Sangrur court. Bharadwaj said that the content of this manifesto has hurt their sentiments. And the civil judge Ramandeep Kaur, who is presiding over the case, issued the notice to Kharge after a petition was filed by Bharadwaj. The judge asked Kharge to be present in the court on July 10th, which is the date of the next hearing. The petitioner's lawyer Lalit Garg said, and I quote, "The comparison of the Bajrang Dal with the PFI has impaired the name and honor of the members of the Bajrang Dal and the Hindu Suraksha Parishad, who number in the crores, and also defames the followers of Lord Hanuman, who is reverentially worshipped by crores of Hindu practitioners and others." Unquote. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was hosted by me, Rahel Philippos, and written and produced by me, Rahel Philippos, Shashank Bhargav, Utsha Sadmin, and Anvati Singh. It was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and Abhishek Kumar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone who you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at @ExpressPodcast and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.